A man from Wuhan who has been working in Beijing shared with the Chinese-language Epoch Times some of his experiences of being trapped in both cities under the CCP virus lockdown. Liu Jun, a pseudonym, arrived in Wuhan on January 23rd, the night when the city was quarantined, and was forced to stay there for more than 4 months. After extraordinary efforts, he was able to return to Beijing on June 7th, thinking that the nightmare he had experienced was finally over. But only days later, on June 11th, Beijing became another epicenter of the CCP virus.
I am a native of Wuhan, and I work in Beijing. I went back to Wuhan by high-speed train on the evening of January 23rd, the day of the lockdown. The train left Beijing at 8 p.m. and arrived in Wuhan at 11 p.m. I was the only person on the train when it arrived at Wuhan. Almost everyone else got off at Zhengzhou, a city between Beijing and Wuhan, because the epidemic was very serious in Wuhan at the time. I had no other choice. I had to go home. Wuhan is my hometown where my parents live. Fortunately, there was still public transportation and taxi service on January 23rd. On the following 2 days, all public transportation, taxis, and cars were forbidden to operate. I was able to stroll around on January 24th and 25th. However, by January 26th, all transportation was suspended and the streets were almost empty. Only those who had been infected with the virus were out on the street as they needed to go to the hospital. It was difficult to find a hospital to provide treatment and even more difficult to get a hospital bed. All major hospitals in Wuhan had more patients than they could handle. There were tens of thousands of new confirmed cases every day. The most horrible day was February 12th, when about 15,000 patients were identified. Actually, many people were diagnosed with the virus before February 12th, but their cases were not reported because there were not enough hospital beds for everyone. The authorities postponed the reporting of these cases. I think I myself also contracted this pneumonia at the end of January.
Really? Did you take a nucleic acid test?
No, there were very few test kits available at the end of January.
Did you go to the hospital?
I went to the number 5 hospital's fever outpatient department. There was a long waiting line, more than 100 people, at the fever outpatient department. We kept a distance from one another. I only took a routine blood test. The doctor said my lymphocytes were abnormal, so I was told I should be counted as a suspected Wuhan pneumonia patient. The doctor then prescribed some medicines for me. I recovered after taking the medicine. At the initial stage of the lockdown, there were still street vendors selling at night markets. They didn't take the epidemic seriously. The lockdown got really serious in mid-February. No one was walking on the street at all. All vendors disappeared as no one was allowed to go outside their community. How did they seal the communities? Take my community as an example. They used steel panels and fences to seal every side. Basically, our homes were turned into prisons. When Wuhan lifted the lockdown on April 8th, I was overjoyed. I thought I could go to Beijing immediately. However, there were all kinds of strict requirements if someone wanted to return to Beijing from Wuhan.
What were the requirements? I know that Beijing was the last city that accepted people from Hubei province.
It was extremely difficult to enter Beijing. First, you had to take a nucleic acid test in Wuhan. When the results came out, you had to report it to your community office, which would then ask Beijing to issue a formal acceptance letter. With this letter, finally, you could book air or train tickets. Unexpectedly, on June 6th, there were suddenly no restrictions for us to go to Beijing. There was no need to quarantine upon arrival in Beijing. I only needed to present my test result. I was so happy when I heard the news. I arrived in Beijing on June 7th and started to work on June 8th. After 5 days, on June 12th, the Xinfadi market in Beijing became a new outbreak location. I am now stuck in another pandemic battleground. A colleague of mine, whose cubicle was next to mine, had visited Xinfadi for grocery shopping. His entire community was sealed. The authorities ordered him to take the nucleic acid test and undergo a 14-day quarantine at home. There was a surveillance camera outside his home, as he was forbidden to go out during these 14 days.
Was the surveillance camera recently installed just for this purpose?
Yes. Now we think Wuhan is relatively safe, but everyone is scared whenever the name Xinfadi is mentioned. Several districts in Beijing are designated as medium-risk regions now. Fengtai district, where Xinfadi is located, is designated as a high-risk area.
Did any of your friends or people you know pass away from COVID-19?
6 people, all seniors. All young people I know who were infected have recovered. In Wuhan, many people died from the virus. My estimate is that more than 20,000 died before they had a chance to get a diagnosis. A friend of my father works in the funeral industry. He told us that all crematoriums in Wuhan operated at full capacity to burn corpses, and this situation continued for many days. Those people had not been confirmed by diagnosis, but I think they were all coronavirus deaths because their symptoms were the same. Continuous low-grade fever, tightness in the chest, shortness of breath, lethargy to the point they wanted to stay in bed all day. So I estimate that the real death toll is 20,000 more than the official count. Imagine how many corpses they must have handled. The crematorium staff work 24 hours a day. At a later stage, the army authorities even dispatched several mobile cremation facilities to Wuhan.
The interview was conducted on July 1st by Gu Xiaohua of the Chinese-language Epoch Times.